What's good? What's good? Welcome to the Dr. Eric K. Coleman Show. It's good to have you here. The topic for today, it's coming from my book, Paradigm, Thinking Different About Relationships. We'll be coming from chapter 9, Shut Up and Listen. I believe it's very critical and crucial that we have this conversation concerning, do we even know what effective listening is in a relationship? Do we know how to listen? Or is it that we're just so eager to jump into the conversation based off of what we believe to be true, based off of preconceived perceptions, thus totally derailing the conversation before you even get started? And so I just want to walk through chapter 9 here and to give us a bit more perspective what I mean when I say shut up and listen. Please allow me to read a few of the excerpts here. Starting at the beginning of chapter 9, have you ever played the game telephone? The object of the game of telephone is for the first person to communicate a message to the person to the right or the left of them. And once they communicate this message, now this message has to come full circle within the group, whether it's going from the left or to the right. And by the time it gets back to the original person or to the last person, we need to see if the message got lost in translation or if the message was translated accurately to where the last person was able to receive the message that was shared by the very first person who started the game. Here's the issue and here's the problem with that. I'm pretty sure a lot of you out there have played this game in your childhood or even with professional development activities on your job. 9 times out of 10, that message is totally jacked up by the time it gets to the end of that circle. And when they yell it out at the end, it is something totally far-fetched from what was originally communicated and what was originally shared. So, for example, I have here in the book, if I stated Mary had a little lamb, you would already formulate in your mind next part of that statement would very well be its fleece was white as snow. If you're familiar with that, that's where your mind would automatically go once the person says Mary had a little lamb. By default, we would think, okay, I don't need to listen to the rest of this conversation or this statement because I already know what comes next. Now, if we do something in regards to the dog drove the car, you have no earthly idea as to what I'm about to say next. So your next inkling would be to hone in to figure out what is this person going to say next. But again, back to my previous point, when we enter into conversation that we believe we already know where this is going, we have already made up in our minds what our response is going to be, or this is a conversation that has sparked something in our past that has triggered us, we believe and think within our scope of reasoning that we automatically know what the person is going to say. We know how they feel. We know what they are going to convey to us. And we totally check out of the conversation. And family, that's very dangerous. It's not fair to the other person and it's not fair to you because at this juncture, when you have just totally checked out, you have no earthly idea where this conversation is going or where it is headed. The point is when we are listening to other people as they speak, we cannot assume we know where they are going in the conversation, or even if it may seem familiar territory to us, we then find ourselves in a position that we tune out. I know I'm not the only person that has chosen to check out of the conversation. I thought I knew where it was going. And when I formulated my thoughts, when I formulated what I wanted to communicate to the person in response to the statement that they were making, I was totally off base because I tuned out. That's what we're dealing with here in chapter 9 of the book. Learning to shut up, learning to shut your brain off, and just listen. Here I say listening is the most critical part of a conversation, and it guides you in how to properly respond. Listening is the most critical portion of the conversation. Every conversation is unique, and it should be given the utmost respect as to understand what someone is trying to convey, no matter how big or small the dialogue. It is important to listen. Don't miss the original message because you are only focused on familiarity. Let me repeat that. Don't miss the original message because you are only focused on familiarity. Phrases that are familiar, words that are familiar, situations, thoughts, emotions, dealing in these conversations, and it feels familiar to you. I've been here before, so I know where this is going. And when we retreat to those old habits, old relationships, triggers, we miss the intent or the etymology, the origin of the message, because we have already formulated in our minds, based off of our past experiences, our lived experiences, what is about to go down. And again, we totally disservice the entire process when we have arbitrarily made up in our minds what is about to happen. Another key point to the game of telephone is the environment as to which it is being played. Normally, there is excitement in the room. People are laughing, talking, and moving around, as everyone is encouraged to remain quiet as possible for the purpose of the other person to hear the communicated message. It's evident that the excitement of the game overshadows the need for quietness. And you're saying, Eric, what are you trying to say here? The need for quietness to play the game telephone is critical and paramount. If the excitement and the eagerness to receive the message overshadows the importance or the intent to get the message itself, we're automatically starting off on the wrong foot. You're in the group, the message is being communicated, there's laughter, there's glee, there's joy. The downfall to this is not that there is excitement in the air or anticipation. It is that we have allowed the anticipation and the excitement to overshadow, to overcast the importance of what we're trying to complete here, what we're trying to hear. As one person is trying to share the message with another, laughter has taken over and it has become harder to enunciate each vowel, word, and syllable, let alone an entire phrase. This goes back to one of our past conversations concerning emotional regulation. If we are not able to control our emotions in the midst of a conversation, it very well overshadows the intent and the purpose of the message that is to be communicated. We need to have self-regulation when it comes to our emotions, because we do not want our emotions to take over the conversation. Once we allow our emotions, once we allow our personal feelings to overshadow the conversation, we miss the intent of what is being communicated. And then we turn the conversation into something that it really wasn't even meant to be. Thus, for the example of the telephone, because we are so overjoyed, we are so engrossed in our emotion and our excitement, we are anticipating what is going to be conveyed, We have now allowed the emotion of the environment, the emotion of the anticipation, the emotion that we now have inside of us. We've allowed that to overshadow the game to whereas we can't even formulate a thought. We can't formulate a sentence. Our syllables are not coming out correctly. We can't pronounce the vowels because we are so overcome that we can no longer focus on the intent of this conversation. And now the message that we are conveying to other people is now distorted because we've allowed the emotion, the atmosphere, we've allowed the environment to take control as opposed to us having this emotional regulation to be able to control the dynamic of the conversation so that we can communicate exactly what it is that we want to communicate to the person we are in dialogue with. As I communicated in chapter 6, all too often I encounter couples, friends, and coworkers who battle communicating effectively. I want to touch on a few questions that we can ask in helping us identify breakdown. And when I talk about the breakdown here, I'm referring to what's happening during translation. What is happening in the environment, in the midst of the conversation when a person is communicating something and the other person is supposed to be receiving that information? What is going on between translation? What is going on? What is happening from the moment the words leave my mouth and they hit your ears? I'm pretty sure we've all heard the question or statement before. Were you listening? Were you listening to what I'm saying? Because your response is totally off kilter, nor are you able to regurgitate or read back to me what it is I said in an appropriate manner. And when we talk about the purpose of the telephone game, that is the whole point at the end, to state back what the original person said. And once we give the answer and it's totally not what was communicated by the original person, the question comes up, were you listening? Sure, this is a fun game, but it gives credence to the all important need for effective listening and effective communication. So again, when we asked what was the breakdown, what was it about the environment? What was it about what I said, how I said it, the tone I said it, the context that I said it? What did you not get to whereas you were not able to receive what I was conveying in the manner as to which I intended it to be conveyed? So let's take a look at these questions here that we can use in a tangible sense to try to gain some perspective here. Again, this is self-reflection. Are people entering the conversation with realistic expectations? Are we seeing the conversation only from one side? Or are we tuning the other person out? I know there's many of times where there's been conversations with various people. Do I really feel like engaging in that conversation at that moment in time? Absolutely not. That is an intentional choice to tune somebody out. So we got to be very real with ourselves when we're having these self reflections. Are we seeing the conversation only from one side? Is it about me? Again, going back to another one of the clips that we were talking about, mutuality. Are we coming to the table trying to see how I can benefit only? Or am I coming to the table to see how the other person may be affected to whereas they may benefit as well as I benefit? Letter C. Is the conversation all about you? Is it even important? What we're bringing up to people, does it really amount to anything? Is the conversation productive? Is it going to yield anything? What is the relevance? How will we grow from this? Letter D, what is the environment as to which the conversation is happening? I see this all the time. People will talk about how they do not have effective communication. However, the person who wants to start the conversation has to be in tune, has to be intuitive enough to know when to speak and when not to speak, when to just shut up or listen. I mean, if you know that you have something very important, or it could be very important to you that you want to discuss with someone, but you know this person is preoccupied, they may have just worked a 12-hour shift from their job and they're tired, or it's late at night, you just put the kids down and you're exhausted from the day, and your spouse wants to turn over and have a conversation, or if they're in the midst of their favorite television program or their favorite sporting event that's premiering on television, or in the midst of a premiere of a television program, and you want to have a conversation right then and there, but the other person is not engaged at the moment because they are in tune to this television program. But then we want to turn around and make it all about us, to whereas I am not important. Am I not important enough for you to turn away from this television program to hear what I have to say? Well, that is totally unfair and an unrealistic expectation, because we have to be conscious surrounding the environment as to which we would like conversations to happen. Are we really paying attention to what the other person is saying? Or are we just trying to get through the conversation, or just go through the motions just to say that we were in the midst of the conversation? Those are a few questions that we need to ask ourselves when we're talking about self reflection. When I was a child, I had it drilled into my head that I have two ears and one mouth. From an anatomy perspective, this concept is easy to understand. As I looked in the mirror every day, I saw the two ears and the one mouth, which translation for us today, we have two ears for a reason and one mouth. You know, how often do we try to flip that to make it to where we have one ear and two mouths? And we need to be very patient. We need to be very intentional and just wait. Just wait. But why am I talking about listening so much? Listening is so powerful. A lot of times, even in my relationship, in my marriage, I would approach a conversation with my wife and I would ask her, "Dear, I know you want to engage in the conversation, but I just need to be clear here. Is this for the purpose of you venting? Is this for the purpose of you wanting my feedback? Or is this for the purpose of you wanting me to give some type of direction in fixing the situation?" And by laying those ground options, it helped me engage the conversation appropriately, as to where I know how to fixate my mind, I know how to posture myself, and I know how to effectively listen, and what I'm listening for. There's an exercise in the book called listening styles. And I want to take a quick look at these. There's 5 different styles of listening here: affirming listening, relational, analytical, context, and next steps. And we can see here the descriptions off to the right-hand side: listening for enjoyment, not responding, which is affirming; relational listening, providing support, body language, and emotional engagement; analytical listening, honing on specific details, reversing information for immediate and future use; context listening, seeks understanding, desiring to know the whole picture; and next steps listening, which I tend to want to fall into that category because I want to fix it, drawing conclusions based on facts and historical context to determine immediate actions. This is a very high level overview of listening styles, but at any given moment, they are interchangeable and we can use them all or one, depending on the type of conversation that we're engaged in. But it helps us understand how we are to listen. And again, I'm telling you, it may be a very hard pill to swallow when we hear, or when you hear the terminology "shut up," but that has been a blessing to me, to just shut up and listen. Stop interjecting my thoughts. Stop interjecting my perspective. Stop interjecting my opinion. Stop interjecting my feelings, my viewpoint. Who cares? If it wasn't solicited, if she did not ask for it, or if my friends didn't ask for it, if my family members didn't ask for it, if my coworkers didn't ask for it, who cares? Just shut up and listen. It's very freeing to be able to just sit down and just listen. It is an amazing burden that you can remove from yourself, to just know all I need to do is just sit in your presence and listen. And family, I take that even in my spiritual walk in life. A lot of times I approach the scriptures wanting to give my feedback, wanting to give God my perspective, wanting God to hear my heart, when he just says, "My child, just shut up and sit at my feet and just listen. Listen for my voice." And the last bit of advice I'll share with you, again with my wife, is a lot of times when we're talking, she will process things herself as she speaks it out loud. And all she needed was just that sounding board. All she needed was just to know that I was listening to what she's saying, and that I don't miss the original message by focusing on what is familiar to me. So just listen, fam. Let's try to work a little bit harder on keeping our mouths shut, and keeping our ears open, because it is amazing what we will learn about other people. It is amazing about what we will learn about ourselves when we learn to keep our mouths shut. And that's a very hard thing to do. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but we got to learn that skill set of knowing when to speak and knowing when to listen. As we use these tools entering into relationships, no matter what the relationship is, whether it's family, friend, acquaintance, platonic, children, parental, if we enter into these relationships with a clear mind, an intentional posture, an intentional approach, we can start to affect change in our households, in our families, in our community, in society, in our nation, globally, and universal. So until next time, fam, continue to think differently about relationships.